All right, so as I was talking off camera a minute ago, this is a model that's always a little bit challenging as we take a look at motor vehicles and parts. Probably are the most volatile sector that we have, along with, am I sharing the right screen?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Probably the most volatile sector that we have right there, along with aerospace. And this is one of those things that where we were predicting last month a little bit of flatness over the period of time. If you can see, we're kind of generally saying it's going to make a little bit of a downturn, but you can really see the volatility here, kind of the sawtooth coming out of the earlier of this year, and some of that volatility showing up in the further model. The other thing I want to point out was just how wide the cone of variability is on this. So the old model fits completely within inside, or almost completely within inside the cone of variability of the new model. So Keith, you were going to talk about something about the dip that you saw there at the beginning of the year.
Well, and before Chris takes off on it, let me just talk about the model for a second, because I don't remember if we have 18 or 20 different economic metrics in this, but things like chip shortages aren't necessarily going to show up directly in the model, but the impacts from chip shortages would have been picked up by different data variables that do go into producing the model. So there's enough information here where some of those, one-off, never seen it, in 20, 30, 40, 50 years types of events are actually creating sort of the data anomalies that are pushing this lower. So I'll let Chris roll for a couple seconds on the industry as a whole. But
yeah, it's always been a volatile industry, and it's more so now because we're seeing basically attempts to manipulate the sector in various ways. I mean, you've got government efforts to try to get people to adopt electric cars, even though they're 2.5% of cars on the road right now. There's all kinds of incentive to do more. You've got consumers that alternate between being very concerned about fuel consumption to not caring at all about fuel consumption, and that ends up affecting what they decide to buy. The number one concern for the auto sector right now, and this is conversations with the guys at the Center for Automotive Research, cars last far too long, and they are now, the average age of a car in the US is 12 years, which is a record. They've never been that long. The average mileage on a vehicle in the US now is well over 250,000 miles, and they're not by any stretch of the imagination at the point of replacement. The auto sector used to have a cycle. They used to have this notion that people would be buying a new vehicle every 4 to 5 years, and everything was geared that way. People are now hanging on to their vehicles for a decade or longer, and can hang on even longer. The cars don't change in terms of their design or much of anything. The only thing that distinguishes a new car from an old car is that you now have a 72-inch television screen mounted on your dash. So it has changed the whole dynamic of the sector, and it has made them highly susceptible to that supply chain. As Keith mentioned, the chip shortage is not something that shows up in the data exactly, but we know the impact. But a lot of it is just simply the consumer preference, trying to decide, what they want to do. Threats to the industry that are coming down the pike, at least as far as the industry is concerned, is more and more emphasis on the rideshare population, more and more emphasis on some form of mass transit, even the way that we're going to be taxing consumption. There's lots and lots of states now looking at taxing mileage rather than per gallon. So you're going to get taxed according to how far you drive. Very popular in the highly urbanized, mass transit centered parts of the country, highly unpopular in places like Montana and Kansas, where your nearest neighbor is 700 miles away. So it's an area that's seriously in flux, and as we've all been watching for the last several years.
One thing I want to mention about the volatility, Chris, is that if we look at the big dip that happened in April of last year, the industrial production from manufacturing dropped approximately 20 points from about the index value of 100 to about 80. This sector dropped 80 points.
Mm-hmm.
It's outsized of any other sector that's out there significantly. In fact, of overall manufacturing, it's 4 times greater, or a magnitude of the impact on the
Right.
sector. And then it swung right back. Like, I don't know how I don't know how production could possibly stand that, or management could possibly stand that, to work like that. But that's what happened. Keith, I'm sorry for interrupting. You were going to jump in.
Yeah, no. Just was going to add in the supply chain. I mean, right now, what we talked about off camera was the fact that, we started off with these microchip shortages, which, were chronic, and we've seen them for the last year, but now, if you listen to the chip manufacturers, I think, as Chris has said many times, in many sectors, there's a lot of hoarding starting to happen. They believe that a lot of automotive companies have ordered double the number of chips that they need. So the issue is that as chip manufacturers start to fulfill those orders, they're starting to get to 100% of need fulfillment, even though chip back orders, would seem to be significantly higher than that. So the implication there is that we're able to roll cars off of assembly lines much faster than we could 2 or 3 months ago. The raw materials that chip suppliers have on hand hit record highs in July. So we know that they've got all the material they need. They've just got to be able to crank the chips off the off the assembly line a lot quicker than they have been. But that being said, what a lot of automotive companies are telling us now, though, is that shortages of steel, aluminum, copper, some of the other materials that would go into auto manufacturing are also now in short supply. And there's a lot of different things that go into that. I mean, there's been commodity prices that have surged to peak levels that we've never seen before. And so some buyers have held off on purchasing those products. The supply chain issues with literally trying to work through bottlenecks to be able to get those raw materials into assembly lines. We've had cross-border issues between the U.S. and Mexico in trying to get component parts back and forth to be able to, produce finished goods. But the bottom line is that, we're seeing assembly lines cut back from normally 3 shifts. Some are just running single shifts at the moment just because they can't get enough components. So on the demand side, we'll see what happens. Total output since the peak in April at about 18 million units a year. We've dove, we're down to about 14 million units on an annualized basis. I mean, that's where we're trending right now. So we'll see what happens as these supply chains recover, and there's ample material to be able to see really what the demand side looks like, as Chris mentioned earlier.
And something else to add to our list of concerns, the hurricane that ripped through New Orleans and Louisiana affected about 20% of our refining capacity. And the majority of that refining capacity in that area is devoted to plastics. So there is already going to be a plastic shortage that'll be showing up quite shortly. And as anybody who's bought a new car lately knows, it's one thing to be short of steel and aluminum and copper, but cars are made of plastic. And if you start to run short of that resource, and the estimate is that because of the kind of damage that was done, it may be several months before those refineries are back to normal production, and that just creates yet another pinch.
I know we're talking about automotive, but I talked to a boat manufacturer the other day, and he's buying fiberglass. And because of the resin shortages, he's got a backlog of 18 months on just getting fiberglass material to build boats.
Yep.
So,
we talked in an earlier segment about onshoring of different things. I understand that a preponderance of our chips were actually coming out of 1 or 2 companies out of Taiwan.
Right.
So has there been any movement to start onshoring chip manufacturing?
Yeah, there definitely has been. Intel has announced that it's doing a big expansion project. We design something like 70 or 75% of all the chips that are used in the world, but we don't produce more than about 20 or 30%. And that has always come down to the fact that a lot of chip production is manual labor. And if you are not in a labor cheap environment, it's hard to do chip work. And the push is to do more of it in an automated way. So it's coming, and it's being encouraged by federal money and state money and investments, but it's not instantaneous. The nearest estimate at this point is sometime late 2022. We may see some new chip capability coming online, replacing the overseas amount of chip production is probably 2024, 2025 at the earliest.
Got it. Okay, long term, long run, you can see again that even though we have this kind of downturn, it's been kind of doing these camel humps, if you will.
Right.
Yeah, John, I think you got to click on that for us, buddy. Yep.
I thought I did.
No.
Nope, we're still seeing August.
Yeah.
You're still seeing August. Let me,
Still just seeing the last year there. So,
yeah, I did click on
okay. All right. Well, we can go ahead and talk about it. Let's do that.
it. Okay.
Yep,
So,
it's frozen for 1 minute, but whatever.
well, yeah, live video, right? Live video.
There you go.
recorded.
There you go.
Okay, so what we're seeing in the long term is that big camel humps is what you can really see, and you can really see the outside, the volatility of the sector is what the long range will show. I can show I'm going to try to show the year over year. Is that popping up yet for you guys?
No, still.
No.
You know what we're going to do? Let me stop sharing. Let me see if I can reshare the screen and see if that'll help the problem. I'll go to the chart that I want and see if we can troubleshoot it that way. How about that one?
There we go.
There we go. Okay,
Camera.
for some reason it worked that time. So this is the camel humps that I was talking about. And you can see the extreme swings and the volatility of the sector.
Yep, and I think that reflects automotive production and sales is at the core of the entire U.S. industrial community, and we're not the only country that has that distinction. It's the same thing in Europe. It's the same thing in Japan. And so it depends on obviously demand and supply, and the consumer, it's always tricky because most of us are in a position of replacing vehicles because we want to, not because we need to. And that makes it fairly unpredictable. Back in the days of planned obsolescence, whether you wanted a new car or not, you had to get one because your current car was dead in the driveway and was not going to be live again unless you spent $40 million in repairs. Now it's like you just have to get tired of it and say, I want a new car. Why? Well, because it's like,
New color. Yeah.
yeah.
Hey, so this one also, we remind people that this one has a really wide cone of variability.
Yeah.
Right. So, we're thinking it's going to hit Louisiana, but it could hit anywhere from Corpus Christi, Texas to Florida. Right. So this particular one could end up trending upward. And I think as data flows in, if we start to see some of the microchip shortages start to improve, start to see, a little better flow of copper, steel, and aluminum, then you may see it start to trend toward the upper end of that band, which will put it back on the dotted line, long-term 20-year trend. So this is one of those we definitely are going to continue to have to watch it monthly and watch the variability and see how that curve changes.
Okay, and so here we go. Does this one show up? The year over year show up?
It does.
All right, so I don't have to stop sharing. Okay, so you can kind of see it. The variability is all over the map, and this year is no different than any other year.
Yeah, I think the bottom line there, though, is it looks like it's going to trend below sort of that 8-year horizon. So again, it's going to be supply chain disruptions. I think the demand side is still there. It's still strong enough. It's just we've got to be able to fulfill those orders. So.
Right.
Okay.
And this is a graph only economists could love, so.
It's intuitively obvious to the casual observer what this one means.
Exactly.
It's almost like the chart you see when someone's trying to display their strategy, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're going this way.
Exactly.
Either that or we just get John to sign it and call it art.
There you go.
I think that's an idea. I'll just take the left and right off of it, the lines, straight lines, and the indices, and just call it art.
Yeah.
But it's a happy little chart.
Yeah, there you go. There
I'll
you
put a
go.
little tree over here and
Happy little cloud. Yeah, there you go.
That's right. That's
All
right.
right, we're gonna nod off here.